Hello, and welcome to today's ACMP member webinar. Our topic today is scaling change adoption with small teams and limited resources, presented by Nellie Wartoft. My name is Alexandra Hartman, and I will be your moderator for today. First, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Tigerhall, whose support made this possible. Thank you again, Tigerhall, for being a sponsor. Also, we have several upcoming events to look forward to. Our upcoming virtual event, Change Management Global Connect, will take place from July 22nd to 24th, 2025. Registration is open and early rates end April 25th, so don't forget to register. If you enjoy the valuable insights and engaging content, we encourage you to take the next step and join ACMP. As a member, you'll gain access to even more fantastic and informative content, exclusive resources, networking opportunities, and a supportive global community of change management professionals. Don't miss out. Become a part of ACMP today and elevate your change management journey. The Certified Change Management Professional, CCMP, is a globally recognized credential established by ACMP. The CCMP is a good way for practitioners to prove their expertise and knowledge, invest in their ongoing professional development, show their commitment to the ethical and professional requirements, and successfully apply change management best practices. In summary, it advances your professional credibility in this field. It expands credibility internally and externally, assists in competitive recruitment and retention, helps standardize practices used by staff for internal projects and work, and improves the overall effectiveness and consistency of the organization. One of the most valued member benefits is our ACMP resource library, where you can access 10 years worth of member-only tools, webinars, conference presentations, and white papers. The resource library is consistently ranked as one of our top member benefits, so we hope you'll take advantage of it. The next member webinar will be held on April 24th at 12 p.m. Eastern. The topic is Navigating Change in the Age of AI, Strategies for Change Practitioners. Be sure to register at the event calendar at acmpglobal.org and discover other educational opportunities that might interest you. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar will be recorded and made available in the resource library within 48 hours. All audio lines have been muted, and today's webinar will run until 1 p.m. Eastern Time. If you have questions during the presentation, please post them in the Q&A. Questions for the presenters will be answered during and after the presentation. And be sure to join in the conversation and prompts from speakers in chat. And now I would like to introduce today's presenter. Nellie Wartoft is a Swedish technology and entrepreneur reshaping enterprise change activation with Tigerhall, the platform she launched in 2019 to drive large-scale transformation engagement for global businesses. Backed by over $10 million from investors like Sequoia Capital and Monks Hill Ventures, Tigerhall powers transformation for Fortune 500 giants across 32 countries with teams in 12 markets. Named on Tatler's Gen T Leaders of Tomorrow and International Business Times Top Entrepreneurs to Watch 2023, Nellie is a sought-after speaker and regularly presents at change and transformation forums across the United States, Europe, and Asia, including TEDx, Cornell University, the Conference Board, Business Transformation Exchange, and the Change and Transformation Summit USA. Nellie, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ali. And it's so great to be here. I love this ACMP audience. We had a great time back in February when I was here last with you guys. And for those of you who are joining us again today, welcome back. It's great to see you again. And for those who are new, it's great to meet you. So as Ali shared, I'm Nellie Wartoft. I'm the founder and CEO of Tigerhall, which is a change activation platform. And I'm also the chair of the Executive Council for Leading Change, which is an industry association for senior change and transformation leaders with about 500 members in the US and another 100 across Europe and Asia Pacific. And what we'll be talking about today is how do we scale change adoption with the tiny teams that we have and the zero resources that we're always given as change practitioners. This is something that I have conversations with change leaders about almost every day, where it's how much resources do we have and what can we not get, and what is the ratio between the teams that we do have and the number of employees that we're trying to change, right? And it's usually, like, based on my conversations, I think the ratio I've gotten to is 1 to 10,000. So for every 10,000 employees, there is about one person leading change. And everywhere it's like, yeah, you have 2-3 people usually in the change team that is trying to change 20-30,000 people. Like, that is an insane ratio, right? And no wonder it's hard to change all of those people being such a small team. So we're going to tackle how can we do this differently with the little resources that we have, and how can we continue scale change adoption and do this at very large scale. So let's first look at what is the number of change, right? And like, is it becoming more and more change, and is that increasing? The answer is yes. So you're not crazy when you think that there is more and more change coming your way. There are more and more initiatives asking for your attention. You're not alone, and you're not crazy. The amount of change has gone up over the last 10 years. And this is data from Gartner around how much that has gone up. And it's gotten very exponential over time, right? So it was starting to increase already before COVID. Then COVID, of course, accelerated it with all the changes in remote work. And then we have return to office after that. So COVID was definitely an accelerator. And then we're seeing another accelerator coming up 2023, 2024, which was and continues to be AI. So you have a few of these that are accelerants in the number of changes. This is the average number of change impacts per employee per year. And if we look at the organizational support for these number of changes, when it was 1 or 2 changes per year, employees were very much like, yeah, like, we're all in, like, let's do this. This is the change of the year, right? And there's something new happening. So around 10, 15 years ago, you had change support around the 80% level across organizations. Whereas today, with these like 15, 16, now coming to 18 changes a year, that support is dropping down to around 30%. So it leaves us with this big gap, what we call the activation gap, between how supportive are the employees, how excited are they to change, compared to how much change needs to happen. And then you layer those tiny David Goliath scenario, 1 person to 10,000 employees kind of change teams on top of that. And this becomes really hard, right? So when you feel like there is more and more change happening, it is true, there is more and more change happening, and this is only going to continue to increase, right? Someone told me last week that we'll never change as slow as we are now. So it will continue to change faster and faster, and it's never going to be slower than what we're experiencing today. So then let's take a look at headcount allocation to this change, right? So like, has this kept up with how much change is actually happening? And the answer is pretty much no, it is not keeping up. So if we look at the number of employees in the change teams and how many percent of the organizations had that kind of team size, you look here across 2015, 2017, 2019, 2021, and 2023. And across all of these years, 8 years, you had around 50% of organizations that had 2 to 5 people in their change management teams. And this is org-wide, right? So these are dedicated change professionals that have it as their job to drive change in large organizations. So 2 to 5 was the most common. And if you look at all the other levels, it pretty much hasn't changed, right? So it's about 12, 13, 14% that have 1 employee, 50% of organizations have those 2 to 5 employees, 20, 25% of organizations have 6 to 10 employees, and then you have a few both below 10% that have 11 to 20 or over 20 employees. So this is the average size of change management teams worldwide. So if we take this time span, if we look at 2015 to 2023, change has massively increased, but teams just haven't, right? So taking those 2 data points together, what we're seeing that the data is telling us is change has gone up by 933%. So you've almost had a 10x of the number of changes. And then when we look at the change teams, how much have they increased, do you think? How many percent have change teams gone up when change has gone 933? The answer is 2%. So we've had a 2% change in change teams increase, but 10x in change. So this speaks a picture, right, of what exactly are all of you in the audience up against, and what is the reality that we're seeing and that the data is backing up. This is what is happening. But how are people reacting to this? How are organizations reacting to this? The answer for many has been to kind of put duct tape on this and add in a shit ton of consultants. And if you look at the different functions across an organization and you compare their spend on consultants compared to their spend on technology, there's a very clear inverse trend. And it's almost like the more someone spends on technology, the less on consultants, and vice versa. So if you look at teams like sales, for example, very seldom would you outsource your sales team, right? Like tell like, oh, like, can you go sell our product? Like, can someone from another company that has never experienced our company, can you go actually sell our product? Very few people do that. You might have advisors around sales strategy and go to market, but you wouldn't ask someone else to actually come into your company and sell to your customers, right? On the other hand, a lot of technology is used by these teams to make them more effective, give them better data, make them more insightful, faster, smarter, more powerful. So on that far end, you have the sales team. Then on the far other end, we find ourselves. We find change and transformation teams. Very, very high spend on consultants and almost nothing on technology. It's all using whatever is lying around, a mix of SharePoints and emails and tons and tons and tons of Excel sheets. If you ask yourself how much time you spend in Excel sheets every day, I'm sure there are a couple of hours at least that come up, at least that's what I hear. So it's been this response where we're not going to add to our in-house change capability, but instead what we're going to do is outsource this to someone completely else, another like consultant. And I want to make it clear across this presentation that I have absolutely nothing against consultants. I think consultants are really great in many things. I think the problem becomes when we make consultants a one-size-fits-all solution. And we bring them in for staff augmentation and to do everything that we should be doing internally, we just don't have the time for. And it becomes this solution that isn't really fit for purpose, but we just don't have any other way to do it. And that is the problem that we're seeing in change. And I think there are a few reasons for this. And the thing is, you cannot just out-hustle when we look at exponential always on change. You cannot just work harder, do more, bring in more consultants. Like what is happening right now that I see is that we kind of throw more bodies at the problem, more hours at the problem, more work, more craziness, and it just becomes more and more of this hustle culture. But that doesn't really work. When you have this exponential always on change, it doesn't really work. So we need a better way of scaling change adoption, right? We cannot just send more emails and do more PowerPoint town halls and bring in more consultants. The answer isn't more. And I think that's what we've seen over the last years is that people just think more and more and more and more. And the thing is that CEOs are not going to back down. We're not going to have less change. It's always going to be more and more change, but we need to change how we think about it and not have this answer of just like trying to out-hustle it and trying to burn ourselves to the ground, which I know many change professionals are very prone to burnout, and that happens a lot because it's just more and more and more happening all the time. So we need to think of it different in a better way. And I think there are three shifts that we need to make in how we think and how we approach change management. And these three need to happen not only in change teams, because I know that these thought shifts are already happening in many change management teams, but across the business and especially at C-suite level. And that's one part of what we're doing in the Executive Council for Leading Change, right? Is how do we change this mindset across our C-suite and the other stakeholders that we work with as well. But these three shifts, the first one is accepting that it's not ad hoc anymore. Change is definitely not ad hoc. It's always, always on. And having this mentality of it can be once and done, and then we move on, and then we get back to business as usual. There is no such thing as business as usual anymore. Change is the only constant. And if you're not leading change, then what are you leading? Because there is nothing else to lead apart from changing and transforming and adapting to the market and adapting to consumer preferences. There is nothing else. So we need to have this acceptance that change is always on. There is no such thing anymore as a project. And the fact that we continue to treat change like a project is kind of like if you treated, like you would never treat sales as a project or customer as a project, right? You treat sales as something that is always on. You need to always be selling and growing the business and capturing market share. It's no such thing as let's capture 5% market share this year. So we'll bring in a bunch of consultants to do that. And then we can go back to not capturing market share. That's not how any other business works, any other function. So why do we treat change like it's something that is once and done and just a project that should be handled a project management way? It doesn't work like that. The second shift I think we need to make is from this fragmented way of working in change management to being much more connected and driving flow across our workflows. It's still this duct tape of like different tools that are like none are fit for purpose. It's a lot of Excel sheets, and we know that Excel sheets are great for many things, but Excel sheets cannot be the solution for everything. And we need to be better with how do we connect the workflow, how do we work smarter, how do we avoid all of this copy paste and lift and shift and doing something here and then like copy pasting it over there. And it's a mess of just the coordination and administration of everything that we do in change management. So thinking more from a flow perspective and how do we get into workflows that actually connect, being smart around how do we leverage data, how do we leverage that data to then drive the automation and make sure that the work that we do that is many times repetitive can actually be done a bit smarter. And then the last piece is that consultants to core capabilities. And again, consultants themselves are not the problem, right? Like there are many consultants who are absolutely excellent in what they do, but the problem becomes when we bring in consultants instead of building change as a core capability. Because what we need to do is to make sure that we have a core capability in-house to run this always on change and continue to change and transform the company over and over and over again. And all of these three in combination makes this kind of situation where we think that changes, and this comes back to this change being a project versus always on, right? But we think that, oh, it's done once, so we don't really need to rethink how we work. We don't really need to be smart around how we use data. And let's just bring in a consultant because it's just this one project. Once we have this change done, once the ERP implementation is done, once everyone is back to the office, once we've changed our operating model, once we've done the restructuring, we don't need to change anymore. And this is a mindset that I see every day again and again. And I'm like, it's never going to be that way. You're never going to be done. And when we think that we're going to be done, that's the reason we don't bring these workflows. That's the reason we don't build these flows and leverage data and connect our workflows and think smarter and learn over time. That's the reason we don't build this core capability, because we think that it's just once and done and then we can move on. So we don't really need to build this long-term core capability, right? But the truth is that in the long run, the companies that win are going to be the ones that have this as a core capability. It's going to be the ones that drive change the best, that know how to transform and can do this consistently, repeatedly, always on, and do it super well. Those are the winners of tomorrow. It's not the ones that think is once and done. And I think now this is kind of starting to land with CEOs. I see a little bit more response to this from like CEOs and C-suite. I think the pandemic was something that made people think it's even more of a project, because a pandemic gets over at some point, right? Like we're going to be done with this. So that kind of reinforced this message that, oh, it's just like, it's the pandemic and then we're done. I think AI is actually been helping with making people realize more that, okay, it is always on and it is never going to stop. And we need to continue to change and transform all the time. So recognizing that this core capability is the number one competitive advantage that we can build as a company. And all of you working in change and change management and transformation and leading change, this is the most critical part of business. This is the most critical part to get right. So these are the three shifts that I believe we need to make to enable us to scale change adoption with fewer resources and limited teams. But how do we do that and think differently? So in order to think differently and enable all of these three, right? If we want to build always on change, we want to have a flow in the way that we work and the way that we drive change management, and we want to build this core capability. What you want to do is you want to build a system that learns over time. I see this as being one of the biggest issues, is that we do things from scratch for every single initiative. Every new change, there's all this, like you start with a new change impact assessment, you build from the ground up again, and you start from zero. Like, why do we start from zero every time we have a new initiative? That doesn't happen in any other function. There is no other function that starts from zero every time they start a new sales process or start a new finance process. Like, there's no such thing as starting from zero. So you want to build a system that learns over time so that you shorten the speed to launch when you release a new initiative. And then thinking about how can we vertically integrate the workflows and not have this manual lift and shift, the administration, the coordination that takes so much time and frankly mind space when everything is all over the place and you don't have full visibility of what's going on. Thinking about how can we vertically integrate those workflows. And then every change, every initiative should make you better, should build this capacity, should build the capability to lead and transform and drive change. And when you continue to bring in consultants for every single initiative, it just doesn't build that long-term capability, right? So you want to think of a system that actually builds that long-term over time and doesn't just rely on an outside dependency for every time. So that's where always on means that we need to have a system in place that does all of these things. And that's how we need to think about change. So if we look at them one by one, let's start with this ad hoc to always on, because I think this is the biggest shift that every single leader in every single business needs to make. That is definitely not a one-time event. It is a permanent condition forever, and we need to treat it as such. And when we have a permanent condition, we need to build something that is repeatable, something that is scalable, and something that is intelligent, that can treat ongoing change and scale that over time. So again, moving away from this project management, project basis kind of lens to how can we build a system where every change initiative is another input and then the output comes out on the other side based on a few criteria, right? So 3 things here to think about when we look at how do we build repeatability. And the answer to much of how do we do more with less, historically, if you look at the last 100 years, the way we've been able to do more with less is through technology. It is through data. And technology is a thread that will enable you to do more. So the first thing that we need to think through is the data capture. And how do we get smarter with capturing our data? Does anyone in the audience have access to your Microsoft Graph data, for example? I'm going to bring up the chat for a moment. Anyone has Microsoft Graph data access? Just put in the chat, yes or no. Paula has it. Great, Paula. Microsoft Graph data, Susan. Yeah, what is that? As most don't have, this is one of the most powerful data sources that you can get access to. And if you have Microsoft Teams, you have Microsoft Graph data. And what it is that it's all the data around how people in your organization interact, what's happening in chats, what's happening in emails, like basically everything that is going on in the Microsoft suite. So this is incredibly powerful data, right? And if you think of the work you're doing in change management, like all that intelligence, like think through sentiment analysis, people's feedback, like all those things that you would today do manually many times, accessing things like Microsoft Graph data and capturing that is what will enable you to be a lot smarter with how you work around these things. So some of the very useful data sources, Microsoft Graph data, definitely one. ERP data, general data lakes. Most companies actually have a data lake where they collect and store all their data, many times on Snowflake, sometimes on AWS or Oracle. If you can get your hands on as many data lakes as possible, the better. So start with thinking about what data can you capture and what data sources can you get access to. And many times, like sometimes there are compliance hurdles around getting this and getting access to it, but you can many times just get some of it and get started with it. And many times, change managers don't really know either that these sources exist, that there is actually this data in enterprises. So starting there with data capture is the first step. Then what do we do with data? AI is incredibly helpful in so many use cases in change. I've listed a few here, like sentiment analysis, content creation, how do you synthesize feedback? and a lot of areas where you can use AI. Because what is change management about? It's about understanding people, listening to them, communicating to them, enabling them, supporting them, building capabilities, driving culture. It's all qualitative data. And AI, what AI helps us with is that qualitative data and making sense of qualitative data and using qualitative data. So a lot of different really great use cases here. And then once you have that data capture and you can build that AI layer on top of it, you can automate much of this that is very repetitive change management work at the moment. So if we look at a few combinations of these to take a few examples, let's combine these to start with. So I spoke a bit about the Microsoft Graph data, incredibly powerful. And will you get access to every one-to-one that the CEO has with the leadership team? Probably not, but can you get access to high-level sentiment data and what people are like talking about in general, and department data? If you're driving a change that is impacting a certain department, can you get access to how are they thinking and feeling? What's the mood in the department and so on? So the more data that you can get, obviously, the better. Then applying AI to do sentiment analysis. And it's literally as simple as dropping it all in an LLM and having a conversation with that large language model and having a natural language processing tool that can actually allow you to make sense of all of that data. And then when you have all of that sentiment, that's a great way to do feedback gathering, right? So instead of all of these one-to-ones and Microsoft Teams meetings and interviewing stakeholders and doing stakeholder management, can you look at data and get trends over time, which is usually a lot more honest as well than many of these stakeholders in the one-to-ones, and it would save you a lot of time. So that's just one example. Second example, ERP data, performance data, these usually sit in your SAP, Oracle, Workday, like this is where you have a lot of this data. So the data definitely exists. And again, like question of like, can you get access and what you can get access to and cannot, but can you use that data to drive audience insights and segmentation for what kind of support are they getting, for example? If you see people that are going through a certain process in the ERP, let's say you're doing an ERP implementation, of course, technology implementation is always easier to measure these and connect the dots. But let's say you're going through an ERP implementation, you can see where people are at. Can you then tailor the support based on which workflows they have and haven't started? You definitely can. Performance data, your lower performers in sales, or like where are people at in their performance and development. This is of course sensitive data, but can you get it masked? Like there are many tools that actually mask the data so that you can get access to it and work with it without revealing personally identifiable information. And then can you use that to provide support in different areas? And also combining them, because performance is not like people are good or bad, right? Like you can be good in certain things and bad in others. So if someone is performing well in one area, can we have that person getting more support in that area? And then someone else performing bad in another area, can we get different support to that person? So leveraging it for your audience segmentation and providing support in the right places goes a very long way. And this also comes back to resource allocation, right? So if you have a team of 3 people trying to change 30,000 people, which I know is so hard, how can you leverage this to be smarter around where do you allocate those resources? Where do you spend your time? Where do you and your team spend your time? That is where a lot of these benefits are realized. And let's take a third example, workflow events. Again, can you connect it to a lot of different workflows that you're doing? And then based on the workflows that people are making in, say, a CRM system, or AI adoption is another good one, like Copilot implementation, for example, seeing where people are going, using AI to create content specifically for those different workflow events, and then triggering the communication based on when they start a certain workflow. Because the worst part about change communications and training and enablement is that it tends to be all at once, and then people cannot absorb it. So you do all the training in January, but then someone is not actually going to experience that change until August. And in August, there is no chance on earth they're going to remember what someone told them in January. So triggering the communications based on when people start certain workflows, extremely powerful. And if there's one thing that I've learned over 6 years of working with large enterprises and driving this for them, it's timing is almost everything. So when you look at change management, especially when it comes to communications and training, the biggest influence on your impact and success is the timing of delivery. You can have the best training in the world and the most thought through communication and the best whiff and messaging. But if it lands at the wrong time or just a useless time when nobody really cared, it takes away all the quality of that training and communications, almost 100%. Whereas something that is half-baked or like maybe 50% is good, delivered at the right time, has a 30-40x impact. So timing is a huge, huge part. And this is one that you can build with automation and connecting it to workflows. So think through where can you time it and how can you have this delivered? And you don't even have to be there. You don't even have to be there delivering it in a Teams workshop or sending that email, right? You can just automate these workflows. So those are 3 examples of how can we connect the data that we capture, having a layer of AI on top of it, and then automating that throughout the work that we're doing. So a first step for you is to go back and think about what is the data that I can get? Ask around. Like usually, in my experience, when I work with change managers on this, is just asking the question usually gets you 50%, and just going to finance or IT or whoever has the data, right? And figure out what is the data that we have, what is available, what can I use, and how can I get access to the data lakes? And many times also speaking their language, right? Like what is the data lake that we have, who gets access to it, and how do we govern the data? Because everyone now puts a lot of focus on data governance in the age of AI, right? So how do we govern it and what areas can I get access to? And even just like HRIS data, like frankly, HRIS data gets you like 40% there. So you don't have to be a data scientist having access to everything, just get access to the basics and you're already 10 times ahead of where most change managers are. So that's the first step. And then think through AI. There are a lot of horizontal solutions for this that you can use. I mean, there's Copilot, ChatGPT, and then there are many others, and then automation where you can connect these triggers as well. Of course, when you have a change activation platform, you can connect all of this in one place. And there are many ways to do it in different ways as well. And happy to share more about exactly how you can set it up and how it works too. Okay, let's talk about the second one, from fragmentation to flow. And copy-paste is not a strategy. This is still something that many change managers do way too much of. You do one thing here, and then you copy paste it into all the different systems. You copy paste it into an email, you copy paste it into a SharePoint site, and then take a meeting, and then you write it down in an Excel sheet, then you move that Excel sheet, and it's all lift and shift and repetitive and copy paste. So how do we want to do this instead? You want to build vertically integrated workflows. And what that means is having workflows that connect where you don't have to be the missing link, like you don't have to be the link between systems or between tools or between processes, right? So you want to build it in a way where you can take the output from the previous tool and the previous workflow and using that as a direct input in the next thing that you're doing without having to lift and shift in between. So when you look at technology, for example, like at least look at tools that have open APIs, where you have open APIs that you can connect between so that you don't have to be the one exporting, downloading, uploading, and lifting and shifting between, right? So there are some critical things here to think about. One is how you leverage the data and how that data is connected across the entire transformation lifecycle. And this circle is not a perfect circle, right? Like it's not about you do these step by step. Like we all know that all of these happen simultaneously and all of them are going on at the same time. And it's not like delivery then only connects back to feedback. It's all about how can you actually connect, for example, feedback to creation and analysis to planning. So it's not connecting everything in one way, but it's having a system where you can leverage these different data sources for the different things that you do. So let me give you a few examples. Let's say you're doing change communications, for example. Having feedback on what people care about and what resonates with them, can you take that and go directly back into delivery to know how should you deliver a certain message to a certain audience? Can you take delivery preferences, say someone prefers a video or a PDF file or a podcast? Can you bring that back into your creation without you having to think and tell it like this is what people need to do? Can you just be, I want to deliver this message to this audience, and then automatically they get a video, they get a podcast, they get an email, like whatever their preferences are. That's another example. And then in your analysis, when you measure like what actually happened, can that then go directly back into the planning? In most cases, what I see, all of these things tend to average around 25 different systems, and the connecting link is usually never an open API or a data connection or an automation tool. It's a human. And this is what slows you down and why it's so time consuming to do all of that change with so few resources, because this entire process, lifting and shifting in between, slows you down. So think through how can you connect the data sources and reduce the platform switching, because the more platform switching you have, the more time and effort and the more things get lost. I see this all the time where people have something sitting in some source anywhere that nobody ever goes to, and that's a platform that they then just have to copy paste to say, like an intranet, for example. Like very few people usually visit the intranet, but you still have to make the effort of putting something out there, and it just increases this platform switching. So the more you can bring it into one system and fewer systems and reduce that platform switching, the better. And it also reduces the copy paste repetition. And this is kind of the prerequisite for any automation and any agentic workflows. Has anyone started building out any agentic workflows? I'll take to the chat as well. Anyone starting with AI agents can put yes or no in the chat. Awesome. Really good. Okay, so agentic workflows, thinking about them, awesome. Really good. So there's so much you can do about agentic workflows when it comes to this lift and shift and the repeatability and the automation. But before you can build this, the fewer systems that you have, the more data you have connected, the easier these flows are going to be. So that's also how you want to think about it. And then the third piece, moving from consultants to that core capability, right? And again, consultants great for many areas, but we need to use them where they're best used. There's no usually good use of bringing in 30 fresh grads to run a bunch of Microsoft Teams training sessions. That's not a good use of time and money spent, right? And coming back to this concept of having this as a competitive advantage, you're never going to build this competitive advantage in-house if you continue to rent it from the outside. That is what we need to realize. And we need to get smarter and smarter and better with every change initiative that we're handling, that we're running. So you should learn over time. And the problem with consultants is that you don't learn over time. You actually bring in people that have no idea about your organization. And most change leaders that I talk to, they spend more time training the consultants than the consultants actually helping them. So it's so much wasted effort and just like, this is how our company works and how our organization works. And you know this better than they do. You do. And sure, they have a lot of value in knowing horizontally, and they can tell you what's happening across different industries and what's happening across different companies. And there's value in that. But that is likely a 1 or 2 hour conversation. That's not a 1-year project of 35 fresh grads coming in. And then you spend your year teaching 35 fresh grads how to do change management, because they don't know how to do change management. They just got hired out of a school, and then they can lift and shift Excel sheets and PowerPoint slides, and that's their full-time job. They have no idea about change management. So the more you can build this in-house, obviously, the better. And when you think about speed and scale, again, it doesn't come from like more and more and more and more and like throwing more bodies at the problem and more people involved and more of everything. It comes from how do you build an architecture that can actually scale over time and do this really well, where you learn and you get faster and faster and better for every initiative. So that's a good way of assessing if you're doing this well. Are you actually getting faster, and are you getting better results for every initiative? And most change leaders I know run anywhere between 100 to 700 initiatives simultaneously at the same time every year. So you do have a lot of data usually to see, are you improving over time? So a few things to think about here. One is, how can you get faster to speed to launch by leveraging that system data? Because again, coming back to the data capture, you usually have a lot of data. And data from historic change and what has been going on in your organization is at least as valuable as the consultant's knowledge of what worked in this very different company that we worked with 3 years ago, for example. So knowing your own company and looking at historic, and this is where documentation becomes so important, and documenting and saving data, looking at historic change adoption data, for example, across different audiences, and then looking at how did you allocate resources in the previous initiatives, and how did that generate outcomes? What outcomes did that generate based on how you allocated resources? That's a good one to look at. And then being able to clearly identify what are the different initiative types, right? And I know many of you probably already have this, where you have, what are the big ones, the really large transformation initiatives, what are the criteria for those, mid-sized ones, and then like the small ones that might not need any OCM or change manager resources, right? So just having those initiatives clearly defined so that you can also bucket the data and learn from, okay, we have a small initiative. This is how we allocated resources last time. This is where it fell down. This is how we can do it differently this time. So always be learning. That's one of the key areas in doing this well. And for those of you already using LLMs and having access to AI and language models, train them on your data and your assets. There are many ways that you can insert, for example, say like culture documents or values, or just areas like how does your organization work, and then train the LLM on that data and those assets. And that will speed you up a lot over time, because the more data you document, the more effort you document, and the more historic data and intelligence you have, the better your LLM outcomes will be when you look at how can we launch this faster, for example. The second one, which I think is a really, really big one that no consultant will ever know better than you, is knowing your own colleagues. And this is where I see so many not doing pretty much anything. Like so many do not collect audience insights for knowing how can we better activate this change with different groups at different times. Just logging things like, what are people's communication preferences? We know that certain people love videos, other people really crave in person, and some people just want to listen to something whereas others want to read, for example. Just logging people's communication preferences is so like one-on-one in many cases, but it brings you such a further way along than starting every initiative with doing the same thing and sending out emails to everyone. And then, oh, it didn't land with Bob and Susan, but hang on, like last time, everything that was affected with Bob and Susan was video-based, for example. Why did we send them an email this time? It doesn't make any sense. And the same with sentiment levels. You know who are the change champions, who are the groups in your company that are very gung-ho and like, let's change, I want to be the early adopter, I want to try something new. You know who those are. So take stock of that and know how can you leverage them over and over and over again. And the same with who are the influencers. We know we need to change the FP&A team. Who's the most influential for the FP&A team? Oh, it's Bob. How can we leverage Bob at the start of this initiative instead of first running our whole email and SharePoint campaign and town halls? And then when it doesn't work, hey, Bob, can you go in and talk to these FP&A managers because they seem to not be getting this change that we're trying to drive? Doing that at the end is much worse than just moving that to the front. You know that they're influenced by Bob. You know that they want videos. You know how they want to be spoken to. Use that at the start. And the same with their concerns. Like you maybe know that this team that is negative sentiment, influenced by Bob, really wants to engage with videos. That's the best way they receive communication. You might also know that their concern is usually around job security. So how do you then go out and address them right away with what is the concern about job security? How is that messaging framed to alleviate that concern early on? Leveraging a video from Bob to drive that change with FP&A team. This can save so much time and effort, and it also reduces that lift and shift where you don't have to put everything in SharePoint sites and emails and everywhere for everyone all at once. So very effective to keep track of this. And then the last thing is that once people are doing this well, where I see them fall down many times is they don't spend time on what is called change debt. So for those of you who have been in product and technology, you know there's something called technical debt, where like you have a sprint, usually 2 weeks every quarter, where you just spend time on cleaning up technical debt. So that's cleaning up the code and making it like cleaning up data and just making sure that the code base is clean and looks good. How many change managers are spending time on this? Maybe there's another one for the chat. How many of you do a change debt sprint? Yes or no in the chat. Love it, Rachel. Yes, no, yes, no. Yeah, very, very good, Matt. Once the mistakes are made, then it comes to the change step, right? So yeah, a lot of no's. So this is something I highly, highly recommend. And I know that time is sacred and you feel like you never have this time, but you're going to be able to run so much faster when you have these change dates in your calendar, those change date cleanup periods. So just have 2 weeks, usually at the start of the quarter, depending on how your business operates. Sometimes the end of the quarter is the crazy bit, so then you put it at the start of the quarter. But spend 2 weeks on just cleaning up and looking at knowledge management, documentation, learning, and collecting the data and registering everything in systems that you can then feed into LLMs for AI, feed into automation, and so on. And some of my favorites here is like the audience segmentation. So reviewing like what it's like, is Bob still influential? Did Bob leave? Like all these audience insights, reviewing them on a quarterly basis is a really good best practice. RCA reviews. RCA is root cause analysis. Doing root cause analysis of where did it go wrong and where do we need to change resource allocation the next time. So every time you do these change that sprints, feed that into the system data, right? So look at how did we allocate resources for this particular initiative? And then the next time you have that type of initiative, then look at what was the outcome of allocating resources that way and how can you change it the next time to maybe get a different outcome. And then my favorite is anti-pilots. Has anyone done anti-pilots before or know what it is? New term. So anti-pilot. So most of you will be familiar with a pilot, I think. Like pilot is when you start something, right? So pilot is when you try something. You launch a small thing and you try and see what happens. And anti-pilot is when you stop doing something and see what happens. Just kill it. Something you've always done, just stop doing it and see what happens. Maybe nothing happens. And usually many times that is the outcome. Like you stop doing something, nobody really cares, nobody notices, and then you know, okay, we don't have to do this for the next initiative. So you can also try this in different changes and just like, I'm not going to do this, and then you see the outcome. And for those of you thinking through how can we better articulate the value of change management to stakeholders, for example, use anti-pilots to A/B test. This is really good. So have 2 different change initiatives. One of them you do anti-pilot on setting up a SharePoint site, for example, or anti-pilot on stakeholder interviews. Like just anything, do an anti-pilot, stop doing it, and then you measure what happens. So in many of these anti-pilots, like usually in 8, 9 out of 10 cases, you realize that nothing happens and nobody actually cares. So that's a really good feedback point for then your resource allocation, right? Because then you can see that, okay, we can just stop doing this and we can actually save resources here and spend that on this other piece that actually makes a very big difference in the initiatives. So anti-pilots is another good way of doing this. But yeah, change that because it piles up. Like when we do more and more and more change, everything piles up and it gets messy. And the more you use data, there's content, there's communications, like all of these things, it piles up. And the number of change managers and leaders go like, oh, like everything is very messy and it's all over the place and it's overwhelming. It's like, yeah, because like your house would be overwhelming if you kept shopping and you never cleaned up, right? So change creates that you need to clean up. So 2 weeks a quarter is a good practice for having those reviews, logging your learnings, putting the data into the system, keep a clean house, keep it organized, and it will make you so much faster in your speed to launch as well. So overall, the next big competitive advantage is really, really building that core change capability and having this in-house, something that learns over time, something that makes you smarter, faster, stronger, more powerful, not continuing to treat everything like a separate project and then outsource that project, right? And you want to build that system that continues to learn so that you don't have to be the one that builds from scratch every time, or even worse, like bringing other people to build from scratch over time. Integrate your workflows, not having that lift and shift, and have things that build in-house capabilities. So not always relying on people from the outside to come in and do it. Those are really the 3 things that will make you faster, because a world where change is decreasing and you're going to get more headcount and we have all the consulting budgets in the world, like that world is never going to arrive. Never. So instead of trying to fight all the time for headcount and resources and more, try doing things smarter, proving the impact, and then ask for resources after that as well. And I know this is super hard. I know that change is one of the most, or the most difficult or the hardest thing to do. And that's why I love change practitioners so much and why I love this space, because it's always the people that go into these roles are the ones that want to take on the impossible and do really difficult things and challenge themselves. And like, it's really, really cool people that go into change management, right? Because it is such a tough job. It is really that David Goliath scenario. And it takes very special people to do this work. And I always say that change leaders are the ones that are historically really, really good with getting shit done and solving problems. And that's why they get tapped on the shoulder and be like, hey, can you run our transformation too? Because you solve this problem and you're really good with getting shit done. So can you also run this transformation? Those are the ones that get tapped on the shoulder and that then ends up in change and transformation. And that makes this group of like rebels in a certain way, where like people are creative, they're resourceful, they're rebels, they're going against the grain, they're going against like everyone. This David Goliath of like 1 to 10,000. It's a crazy ratio. Like 99% of people could never do what you're doing. So be really, really proud of what you're doing. And I think this group of practitioners, this group of professionals is super, super cool. And I'm so blessed to be working in this space and to be working with people like yourselves all the time. So if we can help make these shifts and prove our value of how much this change capability is really the competitive advantage to CEOs around the world and to business, because this is the most important thing in business. And when the change is changing, then we need to change too. So we need to treat it like it's always on, need to build in flow to do things smarter, and we need to build this core capability for this always on change. And the answer again is not by doing more. I don't want any of you to burn out. I don't want you to be hustling to 5 a.m. in the morning and do this repetitive work all the time. And don't outsource it, but you need to think, how do we build better? So think about systems, tools, data, how can we lead from within? And I'm always very happy to have these conversations with all of you, think through how can you do this better? Where can you find the data? How can you connect your tools? How can you do this better at scale? I'm here as a resource, so all of you feel free to reach out. I think my team can put my LinkedIn profile in the chat as well, so feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. My email as well, nellie@tigerhall.com. Always happy to speak with any of you. And happy to take some questions. Ali, if there are any questions in the chat, happy to answer.
Awesome. We have a lot of questions. For any questions we do not answer today, we will continue the conversation in ACMP Connect. So be sure to look over there for some answers if we don't get to them. But I've tried to combine a couple of questions as we go. So the first one being, when we're using kind of data and AI and automations, is that making us kind of lose that personal interaction that is really valuable to change, and in particular to kind of more of the cultural change? And are we going to kind of AI ourselves out of work is kind of what I hear a lot of, especially where maybe leaders and C-suite may only think of change as more of that transactional, focused on the end goal and not the capability. So kind of what messaging do you suggest for this kind of shift to have with leaders that may have that perspective about change?
Yeah, I love that question. And my answer and my philosophy is, I think what many of you might have heard as well, that it's all about how can we be more human. Like, I'm a very strong believer in that the world is going two ways, and we're only going to be doing two things moving forward. We're going to do the hyper technical, hyper data, hyper automation. Everything is going to be about AI and automation. And we're going to do the superhuman, the work that is like superhuman, super involved with like how do we change people and having that human touch. And an example of this, for example, take stakeholder engagement, right? You're never going to lose the human side of stakeholder engagement. You're always going to have to interact with people and talk to them and understand them. Like, that is never going to go away. But the note-taking from that and the sentiment analysis from that and the personalization of messaging that comes out of that, do you have to be the one that writes all of that down, that feeds into the Excel sheet, that crafts that message? Like, all of this work that we're doing, that what I call the in-between work, in between that technical data automation and the very human, that's the work that AI and automation should take care of. You shouldn't take care of the human part because that's also a competitive advantage, is still that human area, but how does it take care of everything in between? So that's how I would think about it. It's all of the coordination, administration, the lift and shift, the manual, like everything that I've spoken about today. Can you reduce that? That's the core aspect. And then I believe what many people are saying is true, that you're not going to get replaced by AI, but you will be replaced by people who are using AI. So it's more about how you can augment yourself rather than getting yourself out of a job. I had someone asking me like a couple of weeks ago, there was someone that was evaluating Tigerhall that said like, oh, like, but we're afraid of like, if we get Tigerhall in, then we would have to let go of the entire change team. And I was like, I would love if that was the case, if we could build technology as good that could actually replace an entire team. That is not the case. The technology is not there today. Any technology is not there today. So we still need humans in every aspect. It's still quite far away from AI agents, but humans who don't use AI, yeah, I see will likely have a higher chance of getting replaced.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. Regarding kind of the ad hoc versus always on, where we think of, more of that program project view where it provides kind of milestones and accountability and checks. How do we transition to always on without losing some of the benefits of that project perspective?
From a project management perspective, like setting up the milestones and creating the project plan.
Yeah, as we move to more always on continuous change versus just a project one and done, check the list.
Yeah. So I think the answer here lies in how can you like segment the different type of changes, and being more like templatized is like somewhat of a negative word, but how can we templatize it a bit more? And when I say always on, it's not always that one change is always on. Like you will still have change that starts and ends, right? So that like you can still have a project lens of something that has a clear start and end, and take something like an ERP implementation, right? Like that will hopefully get done. Like if you're not done with an ERP implementation, then that's going to be hard. So that hopefully has an end date, but change as a whole will never get done. And I think that's the big misconception we've had historically, is that we think that we can do this once and then it's going to be a period of BAU, but there's no such thing anymore as a period of BAU. So as I mentioned before, like most of the customers we work with, for example, they have anywhere from 100 to 700 initiatives going on in parallel at the same time. And there's no such thing as those 700 ending and then there's a quiet period. So I think the always on is not like one initiative being always on, but it's change as a concept is always on, and many times always on times 700 at the same time.
Yeah, a follow-up. How would you quantify business value or impact of always on change?
I think it needs to be viewed as this core capability, and like how do we build this as a muscle, and the quantifying it, and this is really hard in change management, and it depends on like what is the change that you're driving, what industry are you in, what company are you in, and how does that impact, right? But overall, I mean, at the end of the day, it all translates to revenue, right? And revenue and market share and growth, and that's what CEOs care about. It's growth and the stock price. So the more work you can do backwards to connect it to those lagging end outcomes that are, in 10 out of 10 cases, they are financial. But this is where like the concept of anti-pilots, A/B testing, and some of these product concepts, like I think another area is how do we think about change as a product, right? And how do we then measure and test? And if you start doing some of these anti-pilots, like try have an ERP implementation, maybe not an ERP implementation, but take another change initiative and just not have any change management and just A/B test it, do an anti-pilot, and then you can prove what was the difference in outcome from treating these two initiatives very, very differently. So that's one way you can do it, but try and connect it to financial value. And I have a range of examples of how companies have done that. So anyone who's interested in measurement and how you connect the dots, feel free to reach out and I can share some of the resources that we have around that too.
Awesome. We've got a lot more questions. I think we'll probably switch those to ACMP Connect for time. And so I really just want to thank everyone for participating in the ACMP webinar today. And I would especially like to thank Nellie for that wonderful presentation, ton of engagement from the audience. Thank you so much. And to Tigerhall for being a sponsor. So immediately following the webinar, the feedback survey will pop up. Please take just a few moments to complete the survey, as that helps us shape future webinars. And don't forget to join the webinar exchange community in ACMP Connect to continue the conversation and engage with our speaker and fellow participants. As we said, this recording will be available within 48 business hours in the webinar section of ACMP's resource library, located on the ACMP website at acmpglobal.org. And if you already have your CCMP, remember that by attending webinars, you can earn PDUs towards maintaining your CCMP. So record your hours today. And really just thank you all for coming, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you all. Great to see you. See you soon.